The key weighed almost nothing in my palm, but I had been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to understand what it meant. Mr. Holloway had pressed it into my hand on a Tuesday afternoon in March, his fingers trembling with the effort, his breathing shallow and wet. He was the groundskeeper at Riverside Orphanage, a quiet man who spent more time with the garden tools than with words, and I had never expected him to single me out for anything. But there he was in the infirmary bed, reaching for me specifically, asking the nurse to bring me to him. "This is yours," he had said, folding my fingers around the rust-spotted metal. "The address is on the tag. When you leave here, you go there." He died 16 hours later, and I kept the key in my pocket every day after that, feeling its edges through the fabric, wondering what door it was meant to open. Today was my 18th birthday, and Riverside had a policy that was simple and unforgiving. You aged out at 18. No exceptions, no extensions. Mrs. Chen had handed me a manila envelope with my birth certificate, vaccination records, and $200 in small bills. She gave me a sad smile that I had seen her give to dozens of other kids over the years. That same smile that said she wished things were different, but they were not. I had packed my backpack the night before, rolling my 3 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans tight to save space, tucking my toothbrush and the small photo album into the side pocket. The album had 7 pictures in it, all of me at various Riverside events. No family, no history before the orphanage. I was found on the steps when I was 3 days old, according to my file. No note, no name, nothing but a hospital blanket and a plastic bracelet that said, "Baby boy." They named me Marcus because the director at the time liked Roman names. The key was the only thing I owned that felt like it might have a story attached to it, something that predated the orphanage, something that connected to a world beyond these walls. The tag wired to it was weathered brass, stamped with an address in a town I had never heard of, 3 counties north, 1847, Millbrook Road. No city name, just Millbrook Road. But I had looked it up on the library computer 6 months ago, memorizing the route, studying the satellite images of farmland and scattered houses. The property itself was just a green square on the map. No details, no name attached to the listing, but it was there. And it was real, and Mr. Holloway had wanted me to have it. I walked through the orphanage gates with the backpack on my shoulders and the key in my front pocket, my fingers wrapped around it like a talisman. The September air was cool, carrying the smell of cut grass and distant wood smoke. I had $73 left after buying the bus ticket, and I had no plan beyond reaching that address. The bus ride took 4 hours, winding through small towns that blurred together, places with corner stores and grain silos and churches with white steeples. I watched the landscape change through the window, from suburbs to farmland, from concrete to soil. No one sat next to me. I spent the time imagining what I might find at the end of this journey. A house, maybe, left to me by some distant relative I never knew existed. A storage unit full of belongings. A grave with answers. Anything felt possible, and the uncertainty was almost worse than having nothing at all. The bus dropped me at a crossroads with a single gas station and a faded sign that said, Millbrook, population 812. The attendant inside gave me directions to Millbrook Road, with the disinterested efficiency of someone who had given those directions 1,000 times before. 3 miles east, he said. Past the old Miller place. Cannot miss it. I started walking. The road stretched ahead of me. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by fields of dried corn stubble and wire fences. The sun was lowering in the sky, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. My backpack straps dug into my shoulders, and my feet ached in my worn sneakers. But I kept walking because there was nowhere else to go. The address had been my North Star for 3 years, and now I was almost there. I found the property just as the sun touched the horizon. There was no mailbox, no sign, just a rusted gate hanging crooked on its hinges, and a dirt driveway that disappeared into a stand of old oak trees. The number 1847 was painted on a post in faded white numerals, barely visible against the weathered wood. I stood there for a long moment, looking at that gate, feeling the weight of every choice that had led me to this moment. "This is yours." Mr. Halloway's words echoed in my memory. I pushed the gate open, and it groaned on its hinges, a sound like a sigh. The driveway was overgrown with weeds, 2 tire ruts visible beneath the grass, evidence that someone had driven here once, a long time ago. I walked slowly, listening to the evening sounds, the crickets starting their chorus, the wind moving through the oak leaves overhead. The trees gave way to a clearing, and I stopped, taking in the scene before me. There was a farmhouse, 2 stories tall with peeling white paint and dark windows that looked like empty eyes. The porch sagged in the middle, and the front steps were missing boards. To the right of the house stood a barn, larger than I expected. Its red paint faded to a dusty rose, its roof intact but the wood siding weathered and split in places. Behind the barn I could see the remains of other structures, maybe a chicken coop, maybe a equipment shed, all slowly being reclaimed by the grass and vines. The whole property had the feeling of a place that had been left behind, not violently abandoned but simply walked away from, as if the people who lived here had locked the doors one day and never came back. I felt a strange recognition looking at it, a kinship with this forgotten place. We were both unwanted things, both waiting for someone to claim us. I approached the barn first, drawn by instinct or maybe by the key in my pocket. The main doors were secured with a heavy chain and a padlock, both showing signs of rust but still solid, still functional. I tried the key in the padlock, but it did not fit. Of course it did not fit. That would have been too simple. I walked around the barn's perimeter, looking for another entrance, running my hand along the rough wood siding. The light was fading fast now, the sky turning from orange to purple, and I needed to find a way inside before dark. On the east side of the barn, hidden behind a tangle of wild rose bushes, I found a smaller door, almost invisible against the wall. It had no chain, no visible lock, just a door handle and a keyhole underneath it. I pulled the key from my pocket, my hand shaking slightly, and slid it into the lock. It turned with a resistance that suggested years of disuse, but it turned, and the door opened with a creak that seemed too loud in the evening quiet. The interior of the barn was dark, the only light coming from the open door behind me, and a few gaps in the roof where the boards had rotted away. I could smell hay and old wood and something else, something like dust and time and stillness. I waited for my eyes to adjust, shapes slowly emerging from the darkness. The barn was empty, completely, utterly empty. No equipment, no hay bales, No forgotten tools, just bare dirt floor and empty walls in the skeletal frame of the hayloft above. I felt a crushing disappointment settle over me, heavier than my backpack, heavier than anything I had carried before. I had walked 3 miles for this. I had spent 3 years wondering for this. An empty barn and a broken-down farmhouse, and no answers at all. But then I saw it, near the far wall, barely visible in the dimness, a white rectangle against the dirt. I crossed the barn floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty space, and bent down to pick it up. An envelope, standard business size, sealed and clean, despite the dust around it. My name was written on the front, in neat black ink, Marcus. Just Marcus, no last name, because I had never had one that meant anything. My hands shook as I tore it open, pulling out a single sheet of paper and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "Do not open." The letter was typed, formal, the kind of letter a lawyer might write. "Dear Marcus," it began, "if you are reading this, you have found the barn and used the key that was entrusted to your care. This property, all 47 acres, belongs to you. It was purchased 18 years ago and held in trust until your 18th birthday. Enclosed, you will find a bank statement for an account established in your name. The account contains $3 million, deposited on the day of your birth. However, the account requires 2 keys for access, as per the security arrangement established by the account's founder. You possess the first key. The second key is hidden somewhere on this property. You must find it and present both keys in person at First National Bank, along with your identification, to claim the funds. The founder wished for you to understand the value of patience, discovery, and persistence before receiving this gift. You are not alone in this world, Marcus. You never were." I read the letter 3 times, each word sinking in slowly, each sentence rearranging my understanding of reality. $3 million. My property. Someone had planned this for me before I could even remember existing. The smaller envelope felt heavy in my hand, but I respected the instruction not to open it. I pulled out the bank statement, unfolding it carefully. First National Bank, an account number, and a balance that made my vision blur. $3,017,462.18. The 18 cents felt absurdly specific, proof that this was real, that numbers this large could exist outside of abstractions. The deposit date was listed as 18 years, 9 months, and 11 days ago. 9 months before my birthday. Someone had known I was coming. I sat down on the barn floor, my legs suddenly unable to hold me, and let the reality wash over me. I was not nobody. I was not nothing. Someone had cared enough to do this, to plan this elaborate treasure hunt, to ensure I would have resources and a home and a future. But who? And why the secrecy? Why leave me at an orphanage if they had this kind of money? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. But underneath the confusion was something else, something warm and fragile. Hope, the possibility that I had been loved, even if I had been left behind. The light from the doorway had faded to a deep blue twilight. I needed to find shelter for the night, and the barn offered nothing but dirt and drafts. I folded the letter and bank statement carefully, tucking them into my jacket's inner pocket with the key, and headed back outside. The farmhouse loomed against the darkening sky, and I approached it with a mix of curiosity and caution. The front door was unlocked, the handle turning easily under my hand. Inside, the air smelled stale and dusty but not unpleasant, like a room that had been closed up for a season rather than years. I found a light switch by the door and flipped it experimentally, not expecting anything, but to my surprise, a ceiling fixture flickered to life, casting weak yellow light across the entryway. Someone had kept the electricity on. Someone had been maintaining this place, at least minimally, waiting for me to arrive. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I was not discovering a forgotten property. I was stepping into a prepared stage, a set built for a performance I did not know I was meant to give. The entryway led to a living room with old furniture covered in white sheets, a kitchen with appliances from decades past but clean surfaces, and a staircase leading to the second floor. Everything felt frozen in time, preserved but not lived in. I checked the kitchen faucet, and water ran clear after a moment of sputtering. The refrigerator was empty, but functioning, humming quietly in the corner. I decided to explore the upstairs before it got completely dark. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step announcing my presence to the empty house. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched in both directions, doors on either side. I opened the first door on the right and found a bedroom, simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a small nightstand. The bed had been made with fresh linens, the pillowcases crisp and white. Someone had prepared this room recently. Very recently. I felt the sheets, and they were clean, smelling faintly of laundry detergent. My heart started beating faster. The letter had said I was not alone in this world, but I had assumed that was metaphorical, a comforting phrase. But maybe it was literal. Maybe someone else was here. I checked the other rooms quickly, my pulse racing. 2 more bedrooms, both empty but clean. A bathroom with toiletries still in their packaging on the counter. A new toothbrush, travel-sized soap and shampoo. At the end of the hall was a door with a pull cord for an attic access. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if I should check up there, but the light was nearly gone now and I had no flashlight. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would investigate tomorrow in the daylight. For now, I needed to eat something and rest. I went back downstairs, dug an energy bar out of my backpack, and ate it, standing in the kitchen, looking out the window at the dark shapes of the barn and the trees beyond. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in the prepared bedroom, on top of the covers with my backpack within arm's reach and my shoes still on, listening to the house settle and creak around me. Every sound felt amplified, every gust of wind against the siding like a whisper, every pop of old wood like a footstep. I kept thinking about the second key, hidden somewhere on 47 acres of property. It could be anywhere, buried in the garden, hidden in a wall, tucked into the rafters of one of the outbuildings. The search could take days, weeks even, but I had time now. For the first time in my life, I had time and space and the possibility of a future that was not dictated by institutions and social workers and the pity of strangers. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, bright and warm across my face. The room looked different in the daylight, less ominous, more like a normal bedroom waiting for someone to live in it. I sat up, my muscles stiff from sleeping in my clothes, and checked my pockets to make sure the letter and key were still there. They were. Everything was real. I was really here, really the owner of this place, really on the edge of something that could change everything. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and used the new toothbrush from the counter. Looking in the mirror, I saw the same face I always saw, narrow and pale with dark circles under green eyes, brown hair that needed cutting, the face of someone who had never quite belonged anywhere. But maybe that was about to change. I spent the morning searching the house systematically, starting with the main floor and working my way through every room, every closet, every drawer. I found old photographs in a hallway cupboard, pictures of a couple in their 50s, smiling in front of this very farmhouse, when the paint was fresh and the porch was straight. I found a wedding album, the same couple younger, holding hands outside a small church. I found tax records and utility bills filed neatly in a home office, all paid through an estate account, all maintained by a law firm in the city. But I did not find a second key. I moved to the upstairs, checking the bedrooms again more carefully, looking under furniture, behind pictures on the walls, inside the drawers of every dresser. Nothing. That left the attic. I pulled down the folding ladder and climbed up into the dusty darkness, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the space. The attic was cramped, with a low slanted ceiling and exposed beams. Boxes were stacked along one wall, old Christmas decorations and winter clothes, and the accumulated debris of a life. I started going through them methodically, opening each box, checking the contents, moving to the next. Nothing, nothing, nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the floor in the far corner. The dust pattern was different there, disturbed, with tracks that looked recent. Too recent to have been made by the estate maintenance crew. Someone had been up here recently. I crawled over to the corner, my phone light illuminating a small area that had been cleared of dust. There were footprints, distinct and fresh, leading to a spot near the wall. I ran my hand along the floorboards and found one that was loose. It lifted easily, revealing a hollow space beneath, and my heart hammered as I reached inside. But the space was empty. Someone had found this hiding spot before me. Someone had taken whatever was hidden here. I sat back on my heels, disappointment and confusion warring in my chest. The fresh footprints meant someone had been in this attic within the last few days, maybe the last few hours. Someone who knew about this house, about the hiding places, about the second key. I backed out of the attic and stood in the hallway, trying to think clearly through the adrenaline. The letter had said the second key was hidden on the property, but it had not said it was still hidden. What if someone else was looking for it too? What if they had already found it? The implications were disturbing. I was alone in this house, or so I had thought, but the evidence suggested otherwise. I needed to search the outbuildings, and I needed to do it carefully, watching for any other signs of an intruder. I grabbed my backpack, made sure I had the first key secure in my pocket, and headed outside. The morning was cool and clear, the sun climbing higher and burning off the last wisps of fog from the low areas. I started with the smaller structures behind the barn, a chicken coop that had collapsed on one side, and a tool shed with a caved-in roof. Neither offered any obvious hiding places, and both were clearly abandoned, with no recent disturbances. I moved to the barn, entering through the side door again, and searched it in the daylight. The empty space felt even larger in the sun streaming through the roof gaps, and I could see every corner clearly. No hiding places in the walls, no loose boards in the floor, nothing but emptiness. I was about to leave when I noticed something I had missed in the darkness last night. Footprints in the dust, leading from the side door to the spot where I had found the letter, and then continuing to the main door. Someone had walked this exact path before me, and then left through the main door, which meant they had a key to the padlock on the chain. I examined the main doors more carefully and found scratches around the padlock, fresh metal showing through the rust. Someone had opened this lock recently. Within the last few days, they had come into the barn, probably found the letter before I did, and then left. But they had not taken the letter. Why would they leave it for me to find? Unless they wanted me to know about the account, wanted me to search for the second key, wanted something from me. The thought made my skin crawl. I left the barn and walked the property perimeter, looking for any other signs of activity. The land stretched out in all directions, fields of overgrown grass and scattered trees, a creek running along the southern edge, old fence posts marking boundaries that no one had maintained in years. It was beautiful in a wild, forgotten way, and it was mine. But the beauty felt hollow with the knowledge that I was being watched, or followed, or manipulated by someone I could not see. I found tire tracks near the back of the property, recent enough that the grass had not sprung back yet. Someone had driven back here, maybe parked, maybe left. The tracks led to an old farm road that disappeared into the woods. I followed the tracks for a while, but they faded into the undergrowth, and I lost the trail. Standing there in the woods, surrounded by the quiet sounds of birds and wind, I felt the weight of isolation settle over me again. I was 18 years old, alone on a property I did not understand, searching for a key that might already be gone, tied to money I could not access, without answers I did not have. The smart thing would be to call someone, the police or the law firm handling the estate, someone who could help me make sense of this situation. But the letter had been clear. Find the second key. Present both keys in person. This was a test, or a puzzle, or a final wish from someone who had cared enough to leave me everything they had. I walked back to the farmhouse, my mind turning over possibilities. If I were hiding a key on this property, where would I put it? Somewhere meaningful, somewhere that would require knowledge of the place or the people who lived here. The photographs I had found in the house, the couple smiling together, they might be a clue. I went back inside and gathered all the photographs I could find, spreading them out on the kitchen table. There were dozens of them, spanning decades, showing the progression of the farm, the seasons changing, the couple aging together. In several of the photos, they stood in front of a large oak tree near the house, and in one picture, the woman was touching something on the tree trunk, her hand resting against what looked like a carving or a marking. I went outside and found the oak tree, a massive ancient thing with bark deeply furrowed and branches that spread like a cathedral ceiling. I circled it slowly, running my hands over the trunk, looking for carvings or hollow spots. On the far side, about 5 feet up, I found it. 2 sets of initials carved into the bark, weathered by time but still visible. R.H. plus E.H. surrounded by a heart. Robert and Eleanor Halloway, I assumed, based on the names I had found on old mail in the house. Below the heart Almost hidden by the natural texture of the bark was a small hole, barely bigger than my thumb. I reached inside carefully, half expecting spiders or wasps, but my fingers touched metal. I pulled out a small key, identical to the one in my pocket, attached to a matching brass tag. The second key. I stood there holding both keys, feeling the solid weight of them, proof that this was real, that I had succeeded in the task set before me. But the triumph was muted by the knowledge that someone else had been searching too, and they had not found this spot. Or maybe they had, and they had left the key for me to find. Another piece of this elaborate design. I did not know what to trust anymore. I went back into the house, gathered my few belongings, and prepared to leave for the bank. The town was 3 miles away, and I could walk it easily enough, present the keys, claim the account, and start figuring out what came next. But as I reached the front door, I heard something that made me freeze. A creak from upstairs, the unmistakable sound of weight on a floorboard. Someone was in the house with me. Someone had been here all along, waiting, watching, hiding in the one place I had not fully searched, the attic. I set my backpack down quietly and moved to the stairs, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I climbed slowly, trying to keep my footsteps silent, straining to hear any other sounds. At the top of the stairs, the attic ladder was down, the opening dark above me. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to run, to get out of the house and call for help. But I needed to know. I needed to understand who had been sharing this space with me, who knew about the keys and the money and the elaborate inheritance. I climbed the attic ladder, my phone in one hand, its light cutting through the darkness. The attic looked the same as before, boxes and dust and angled beams. But now I could see a shape in the far corner, someone sitting against the wall, arms wrapped around their knees. A young woman, maybe a few years older than me, with tangled dark hair and a face that looked exhausted and weary. She squinted against my phone's light, raising one hand to shield her eyes. "Please do not call the police," she said, her voice rough, like she had not used it in a while. "I am not here to hurt you. I am not here to steal anything. I just needed a place to stay." I froze on the ladder, trying to process this, trying to reconcile the frightening scenario I had imagined with the reality of a scared young woman living in an attic. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Why are you here?" She lowered her hand, her eyes adjusting to the light, and I could see the dark circles under them, the hollow look of someone who had not been eating regularly or sleeping well. "My name is Rachel," she said. "Rachel Halloway. Robert and Eleanor were my grandparents. This was their farm." The name hit me like a physical blow. Halloway, the same as the groundskeeper who had given me the key. I sat down on the top rung of the ladder, my legs shaky. "Mr. Halloway at the orphanage," I said. "He was my grandfather too," Rachel said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "He was my father's father. When my dad died 3 years ago, I came here looking for family, looking for something that made sense. But the house was locked up, managed by lawyers, and no one would tell me anything. So I broke in. I have been living in the attic, coming and going through a back window, trying to understand why my grandparents left everything to a stranger instead of to their own grandchildren. Her words were full of pain and accusation, and I understood them, understood the bitterness of being left out, of not being chosen. "I am sorry," I said, because I did not know what else to say. "I did not know about you. I did not know about any of this until yesterday." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know," she said. "I found the letter in the barn a week ago, when I finally got the side door open. I read it, and I hated you. This Marcus person who got everything when I got nothing. But then I realized you did not ask for this either. You are just as confused as I am." We sat in silence for a moment, two strangers connected by a family we had never known, both trying to make sense of inheritances that felt more like riddles than gifts. "Did you find the second key?" Rachel asked finally, her voice small. "I did," I said, pulling both keys from my pocket and showing them to her in the phone's light. She nodded slowly, something resigned in her expression. "I looked for it everywhere," she said. "I searched this whole property. I was starting to think it did not exist. I almost took the first key from your pocket while you were sleeping last night, but I could not do it. It is not mine to take." I felt a chill at the thought of her standing over me while I slept, close enough to reach into my pocket, and I was grateful for whatever morality had stopped her. "Why did they do this?" I asked. "Why leave everything to me and nothing to you?" Rachel pulled her knees tighter to her chest. "I have been trying to figure that out for 3 years," she said. "My grandparents were good people, kind people, but they had this idea that family had to be earned, not given. When my dad got into drugs, when he chose that life over them, they cut him off. They told him he was no longer their son. He died alone in a motel room, and they did not come to his funeral. I thought they had just written off that whole branch of the family, that they died bitter and alone. But then I found out about the trust, about the money, about you, and I realized they had not given up on family. They had just redefined it." She looked at me directly, her eyes full of something I could not quite name. "You were 3 days old when you were left at the orphanage," she said. "My grandfather, the groundskeeper, he was the one who found you on those steps. He was driving by early in the morning and saw the bundle, heard you crying. He picked you up, brought you inside, stayed with you until the authorities came. He visited you every week for 18 years. Did you know that? He never missed a week. He would come on his day off, spend an hour with you, play with you when you were little, talk with you when you got older. He never told you who he was because the lawyers said he could not, said it would complicate the trust, but he loved you like you were his own." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable. I had no memory of Mr. Holloway visiting me regularly. He was just the quiet groundskeeper who sometimes smiled at me when I passed, who once gave me a candy bar when I fell and scraped my knee, who I barely knew at all, but he had known me. He had chosen me. He and his wife had set up this entire elaborate plan, this farm and this money and this treasure hunt, to give me something I had never had, a home, a foundation, a chance. And they had done it because they saw something in me worth saving, even as they rejected their own blood for choices that disappointed them. Rachel was crying too now, silent tears that tracked down her dirty cheeks. "I do not blame you," she said. "I did at first, but I do not anymore. You did not choose this, any more than I chose to have an addict for a father. But I need you to know that I am homeless. I have been living in shelters and cars and this attic for 3 years. I am 21 years old, and I have nothing. So if you are going to claim that money, if you are going to live in this house, I am asking you, not as family but as another human being, please do not forget that I exist too. I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the dirt and the exhaustion to the person underneath. She was just like me, unwanted and alone, searching for a place to belong. The difference was I had been given one and she had not, and that arbitrary distinction felt cruel and unfair. I wiped my face and took a deep breath. I am going to the bank tomorrow, I said. I am going to claim the account, but I am not going to keep all of it. Half of it is yours. This house is big enough for both of us until we figure out what comes next, and we are going to open that sealed letter together and find out what else they wanted us to know. Rachel stared at me like I had spoken a language she did not understand. You do not have to do that, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, I do, I said, because Mr. Holloway taught me something in those visits I do not remember. He taught me that family is not about blood. It is about showing up. It is about choosing to care when you do not have to. And right now, you and I are the only family either of us has. So we are going to do this together. She climbed down from the attic, and we sat in the kitchen while she ate food I had found in the pantry, canned soup and crackers that the estate lawyers must have stocked. We talked for hours, piecing together the fragments of our separate stories, finding the places where they intersected and diverged. Her father had been Robert Holloway's only child, a son who had shown so much promise before the drugs took him, before the choices that could not be undone. My existence was a mystery still. No records of my birth parents, no clues in the files, just the fact of my abandonment and Mr. Holloway's decision to intervene. We were both orphans in different ways, both shaped by losses we did not choose. That night we opened the sealed envelope together, sitting side by side at the kitchen table. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting, dated 3 weeks before Mr. Holloway died. Dear Marcus, and to whomever else finds this with him, it began. If you are reading this together, then my hope has been realized. Marcus, you have found the keys and the inheritance I left for you. But more importantly, I hope you have found something else. Compassion, generosity, the understanding that wealth means nothing if it does not create connection. I have watched you grow from an infant into a young man of character, and I have believed in you every step of the way. You were not abandoned because you were unwanted. You were left in a place where you would be found by someone who could give you opportunities your birth parents could not. I do not know who they were, but I know they made a sacrifice born of love, not cruelty. To the person reading this with Marcus, I suspect you are family, blood family, trying to understand why you were not included in this inheritance. The truth is harder than exclusion. Your presence here means you needed this place enough to find it, to wait for it, to fight for it. That need is proof of worthiness. I failed my son by giving him everything without asking him to work for it, to appreciate it, to understand its value. I will not make that mistake again. If you are here, you have earned the right to be here. Share this place. Share this blessing. Build something together that neither of you could build alone. The letter continued with practical details. the name of the law firm handling the estate, instructions for accessing the account, a deed to the property that needed to be filed at the county courthouse. But the heart of it was that simple instruction: share this. Build something together. We sat with those words for a long time, letting them settle into the space between us, erasing the distance that blood and circumstance had created. The next morning we walked to town together, both of us carrying our identification, both keys held between us like a shared treasure. The bank manager was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who seemed unsurprised when we presented ourselves and the keys. She had been briefed by the estate lawyers, had known this day would come, and she processed the paperwork with efficient grace. The account was transferred into our names, joint ownership. $3 million split equally between two people who had started with nothing. We opened a checking account, took out enough cash to buy groceries and clothes and the things we needed immediately, and left the rest to grow and wait for when we knew better what to do with it. We spent the following weeks cleaning the farmhouse, making it livable, turning it from a museum of someone else's life into a home for our own. Rachel had a talent for gardening, and she started reclaiming the yard, planting vegetables and flowers in beds that had been overrun with weeds. I focused on repairs, teaching myself from online videos how to fix the porch, patch the roof, restore the barn. We worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms, building trust through shared labor. At night we sat on the repaired porch and watched the sun set over our land, 47 acres of possibility. And we talked about the future we were creating. Rachel enrolled in community college classes, pursuing a degree in social work, wanting to help other kids who had fallen through the cracks like she had. I did the same, studying business management, thinking about how to use the inheritance to create something lasting, something that would honor Mr. Holloway's faith in me. We talked about starting a non-profit, a place for aged-out foster kids and homeless young adults, a farm where they could learn skills and find stability and know they were not alone. The irony was not lost on us that we were using the fortune left by people who had rejected their own son to help people in the same situation. But maybe that was the point. Maybe redemption was always about doing better than the generation before, learning from their mistakes, choosing differently when given the chance. 6 months after I first walked through that crooked gate with nothing but a backpack and a key, I stood in the same spot with Rachel beside me, looking at the farmhouse with its fresh white paint and straight porch, the barn with its repaired roof and new doors, the gardens full of spring growth. We had planted an oak sapling next to the old tree where I found the second key, a symbol of new growth from old roots. We had carved our initials into it together, M and R, not romantic, but familial, marking our decision to be family by choice rather than by blood. I thought about Mr. Holloway often, the quiet man who had shown up every week for 18 years, who had given me the greatest gift, not when he pressed the key into my hand, but in every moment before that, when he chose to see me as worthy of love. I wished I had known to thank him. I wished I had understood while he was alive how much those visits meant, how much his presence had shaped me, even when I did not remember the specifics. But maybe that was the nature of the deepest influences in our lives. They work on us invisibly, forming us from the inside, and we only recognize their impact when we look back and see how far we have come. Rachel and I were not perfect. We fought sometimes, struggled with the weight of trauma we both carried, made mistakes in managing money and property, and the complex emotions of building a life together. But we kept showing up for each other, kept choosing connection over isolation, kept honoring the faith that had been placed in us by people we barely knew. The farm became more than property. It became proof that inheritance is not just about what you receive, but about what you do with it, how you transform a gift into a legacy. On the first anniversary of my arrival, we held a small gathering at the farm. A few kids from the local foster system, their caseworkers, some neighbors who had helped us with the heavier repair work. We grilled food and sat in the yard and watched the sun set together. One of the kids, a 15-year-old boy named David, who reminded me of myself at that age, asked me how I had gotten so lucky. I looked at Rachel, at the farmhouse, at the life we had built from nothing, and I realized luck was the wrong word. Luck was random. This was intentional. This was the result of one man's decision to care about a crying infant on the steps of an orphanage, to visit week after week, to plan for a future he would not live to see. I told David the truth. I said that I had been given a gift, but the gift was not the money or the property. The gift was being seen, being chosen, being loved by someone who did not have to love me, but who did anyway. And that gift came with a responsibility to pass it forward, to see and choose and love others who needed it. That was the real inheritance Mr. Holloway had left me. Not wealth, but purpose. Not answers, but the tools to find my own. As the gathering wound down and people started to leave, Rachel and I stood by the old oak tree, looking up at the branches that had sheltered Mr. and Mrs. Holloway's initials for decades, that would now shelter ours. The evening air was warm, carrying the smell of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. "This is ours," Rachel said quietly, "not because we inherited it, but because we chose it. We chose each other. We chose to build something better than what we were given." I nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of that truth. We had taken the fragments of broken families and forged something new, something that honored the past while refusing to be limited by it. The key in my pocket was no longer the heavy burden of mystery it had been for 3 years. It was just a key now, a piece of metal that had opened a door to a different life. But what I carried with me was so much more than that. I carried Mr. Holloway's patience, his quiet belief that showing up mattered more than grand gestures. I carried Rachel's resilience, her refusal to let bitterness destroy her capacity for hope. I carried the knowledge that family was a choice I could make every day, not a condition I was born into. And I carried the responsibility to use what I had been given not just for myself, but for others who were walking the same path I had walked, looking for a place to belong. The farm stretched out around us in the fading light, every acre a promise, every building a possibility. I had left the orphanage with nothing, but I had not arrived here with nothing. I had arrived with every lesson learned from 18 years of uncertainty, every moment of longing for home, every dream of belonging. And now, standing on land that was mine and Rachel's, under trees that would outlive us both, I finally understood what Mr. Holloway had wanted me to discover, that you are never truly alone if you choose to connect. That inheritance is not about deserving, but about what you do with what you are given. That sometimes the greatest love is the one you never knew you had, working on you quietly, patiently, year after year, until the moment you are ready to receive it. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber and rose. Tomorrow we would wake up and continue the work of building our lives, of helping others, of honoring the gift we had been given. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough to simply stand here and know that I was home, that I belonged, that I had been chosen, not once but repeatedly, by a man who saw value where others saw only abandonment, and that I would spend the rest of my life choosing others the same way, passing forward the inheritance that mattered most, not money, not property, but the simple, profound truth that everyone deserves to be seen, to be loved, to be given a chance to become more than their circumstances suggest they can be. I reached into my pocket and held both keys one last time, feeling their weight, their texture, their significance. Then I put them away and took Rachel's hand, and together we walked back to the house, to the life we were building, to the future we were creating from the pieces of broken pasts. The keys had opened a door, but what we did with what was on the other side, that was up to us. And we chose gratitude. We chose generosity. We chose to honor Mr. Holloway's faith, not with words but with action, with the daily decision to be better than we had to be, to give more than we received, to create a home not just for ourselves but for anyone who needed one. The farmhouse lights glowed warm in the gathering darkness, and I could already picture the future. More kids finding their way here, more stories of transformation, more proof that one person's decision to care can ripple forward in ways they will never see. Mr. Holloway had changed my life, and Rachel's, and through us, we would change others. That was the inheritance. That was the legacy. That was what it meant to be chosen and to choose in return, creating chains of connection that could not be broken by blood or distance or time. I had left the orphanage with nothing but a key and a question. I had found a home, a family, and a purpose that would shape every day that followed. And that was worth more than $3 million. That was worth everything. The second year brought challenges I had not anticipated. Winter arrived early and harsh, covering the farm in snow that felt both beautiful and isolating. Rachel and I huddled in the farmhouse, learning how to keep the old furnace running, how to insulate windows against drafts that seemed to find every crack in the walls. We burned through our first winter making mistakes, running up heating bills that made us reconsider our budget, learning that owning property meant constantly fixing things that broke in new and creative ways. The pipes froze in January despite our precautions, and we spent 3 days without running water, melting snow on the stove, realizing how fragile our security really was. But we learned. We called plumbers and watched what they did. We read manuals and watched tutorial videos until we understood the systems that kept the house functioning. Every breakdown became an education, every crisis a chance to become more capable. Rachel's classes were going well, but the commute to campus was wearing on her. She would leave before dawn to catch the bus, return after dark, exhausted and overwhelmed by the workload. I watched her struggle and felt helpless, wanting to make it easier but not knowing how. One evening in February, she came home in tears, collapsing at the kitchen table with her textbooks spread around her like accusatory witnesses to her inadequacy. "I cannot do this," she said, her voice muffled against her arms. I am not smart enough. I do not belong in college. Everyone else understands things. I have to read 5 times to grasp. I am wasting money on tuition when I should just accept that this is not for me. I sat down across from her, remembering every time I had felt the same way at Riverside. Every moment I had convinced myself I was not worthy of the opportunities being offered. You are exhausted, I said. You are commuting 4 hours a day on top of a full course load. You are working harder than anyone else in your classes just to be there. That does not make you less smart. That makes you more determined. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. But what if I fail? She asked. What if I spend all this time and money and I still fail? Then you fail, I said, and you try again, or you try something different. But you do not quit because you are tired. You quit because you genuinely want to do something else. There is a difference. We talked for hours that night, and by the end of it, we had made a decision. We would buy a used car, something reliable enough to cut her commute time in half. It felt like a huge expense, dipping into the inheritance for something that was not the farm or the non-profit we had been planning. But it was an investment in Rachel's future, in her ability to succeed without destroying herself in the process. We found a 10-year-old sedan with high mileage but a clean inspection report, and the first time Rachel drove herself to campus, leaving an hour later and arriving home an hour earlier, I saw the relief on her face and knew we had made the right choice. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in patches, revealing the dead grass and mud underneath. I started planning the gardens in earnest, ordering seeds from catalogs, sketching out beds and pathways, imagining the farm as a working operation again. Rachel had learned about horticultural therapy in one of her classes, the idea that working with plants could help people heal from trauma, could give them purpose and peace in ways that talking alone could not. We decided to incorporate that into our vision for the nonprofit, creating gardens that would be maintained by the young people who came here, giving them skills they could use and a tangible result they could see from their labor. I spent March and April preparing the soil, turning over earth that had not been cultivated in years, working compost into the heavy clay, building raised beds from lumber. I milled myself from fallen trees on the property. My hands blistered and calloused. My back ached every night. But the work felt good, felt purposeful in a way that nothing else had. I was building something from nothing, turning potential into reality. And every seed I planted was an act of faith that the future would come, that things would grow, that effort would yield results. By May, we had our first vegetable garden planted. Neat rows of tomatoes and peppers and beans, beds of lettuce and herbs and root vegetables. Rachel helped when she was home, and we worked in comfortable silence most of the time. Our hands in the soil, the sun warm on our backs. Those moments felt sacred somehow, removed from the complexity of our pasts, focused entirely on the simple act of nurturing life. We were learning patience together, learning that growth could not be rushed, that some things required time and consistent care and the willingness to wait for results you could not yet see. The nonprofit paperwork took months to complete. I had underestimated the complexity of establishing a legal entity, of filing for tax-exempt status, of creating bylaws and mission statements, and program descriptions. Rachel and I spent countless evenings at the kitchen table, surrounded by forms and regulations and legal language, that made my head spin. We hired a lawyer to help us navigate the process. A kind woman named Margaret who had experience with nonprofit organizations and who believed in what we were trying to do. She guided us through each step, explained each requirement, helped us understand the responsibilities we were taking on. We named the organization Halloway House in honor of the grandparents who had made it all possible. Our mission was simple on paper, but profound in practice: to provide transitional housing and life skills training for young adults aging out of foster care or experiencing homelessness. We would offer a safe place to live, access to education and employment resources, mentorship and community, and the chance to develop independence in a supportive environment. Margaret helped us apply for grants, connect with social service agencies, establish partnerships with local businesses who might hire our residents. The work was overwhelming and tedious and absolutely necessary, and I threw myself into it with the same determination I had brought to the garden. By summer, we had our nonprofit status approved, our first round of grant funding secured, and a waiting list of young people who needed what we were offering. The reality of actually opening our doors, of welcoming strangers into our home, of taking responsibility for lives that were not our own, hit me with sudden force one evening in July. Rachel and I were sitting on the porch, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight, and she asked me if I was scared. I admitted that I was terrified. "What if we make mistakes?" I said. "What if we fail someone who is counting on us? What if we are not equipped to handle the trauma and complexity that these kids will bring with them?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, watching the fireflies dance. "Mr. Halloway was not equipped to raise a baby he found on orphanage steps," she said. "He was a groundskeeper, not a parent, but he showed up anyway. He did his best. He was not perfect, but he was there. That is all we can offer too. Our presence, our effort, our willingness to keep showing up even when it is hard." I knew she was right, but the fear did not dissipate. It just settled into a different place, becoming something I carried alongside the hope and determination. A reminder to stay humble, to ask for help, to remember that good intentions were not enough without wisdom and care. Our first resident arrived in August. Her name was Maya, and she was 17, 3 months from her 18th birthday, already planning for the moment when the foster system would release her with nothing but a voucher for temporary housing and a list of resources she had no idea how to navigate. Her caseworker had connected with us through one of Margaret's contacts, and when Maya stepped out of the car with a garbage bag full of her belongings, I saw myself reflected in her wary eyes, her defensive posture, her barely concealed desperation. Rachel gave her a tour of the farmhouse, showed her the bedroom we had prepared on the second floor, explained the house rules and expectations we had established. Maya nodded at everything, said yes ma'am and thank you, but I could see she did not believe any of it would last. The first week was difficult. Maya kept to herself, emerging from her room only for meals, eating quickly, and disappearing again. She flinched when I made sudden movements, watched us constantly as if expecting us to reveal our true intentions, to demand something in exchange for the kindness we were showing. Rachel recognized the behavior immediately, having lived it herself, and she gave Maya space while also making herself consistently available. She would sit on the porch in the evenings, reading or knitting, and eventually Maya would drift out and sit on the steps nearby, not talking, just existing in the same space. That proximity was the beginning of trust, the slow erosion of walls that had been built for survival. I focused on getting Maya involved in the garden, asking her to help with harvesting tomatoes, showing her how to tell when vegetables were ripe. She worked with methodical efficiency, following instructions precisely. But there was no joy in it, no connection to the life she was nurturing. It took weeks before I saw her smile for the first time. A small, surprised expression when she bit into a sun-warmed cherry tomato fresh from the vine, tasting the sweetness and complexity that store-bought produce never had. "That is incredible," she said, almost to herself. "We grew that." I nodded, trying not to make too big a deal of the moment, but inside I felt the same triumph I had felt finding the second key. We were reaching her, slowly, carefully. We were showing her that good things could be real. By September, Maya had transformed in small but significant ways. She started initiating conversations, asking questions about the farm, about our plans for Holloway House, about our own stories. We told her everything, holding nothing back, showing her the scars and struggles that had brought us here. She listened with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging information, looking for the holes in our narratives, the places where the facade might crack. But the more we shared, the more she seemed to relax, to accept that our damage made us credible, that we were not pretending to have all the answers. Her 18th birthday came in late September, and the foster system officially released her. Her caseworker came to the farm for a final visit, signed the paperwork that closed Maya's file, and left her with a folder of documents and a prepaid phone card. Maya stood in the driveway watching the caseworker drive away, and I could see the panic rising in her expression, the realization that she was now completely on her own, that the safety net, however threadbare, was gone. But then Rachel put a hand on her shoulder and said, "You are not alone. You are staying here for as long as you need. We are not going anywhere." And Maya turned and hugged her, really hugged her, the first physical affection I had seen her initiate, and she cried into Rachel's shoulder like the child she had never been allowed to be. We established a rhythm over the following months. Maya enrolled in community college, taking classes in graphic design, discovering a talent for visual communication that surprised and delighted her. She helped maintain the gardens, learned basic carpentry helping me repair the barn, started cooking meals for all of us, finding pride in contributing to the household rather than just receiving from it. 2 more residents joined us before winter. A 19-year-old named Carlos, who had aged out of foster care 2 years earlier and had been couch surfing since, and a 20-year-old woman named Jasmine, who had left an abusive situation and had nowhere safe to go. The farmhouse, which had felt so empty for so long, suddenly pulsed with life and noise and the complicated energy of young people trying to heal. Managing a household of 5 was exponentially more complex than managing 2. There were conflicts over shared spaces, misunderstandings about responsibilities, moments when trauma responses collided and created explosions that required careful mediation. Rachel and I learned to navigate these situations together, presenting a united front, while also being willing to admit our mistakes, to apologize when we overreacted, to model the healthy relationship dynamics that many of our residents had never witnessed. We instituted weekly house meetings where everyone could voice concerns and contribute to decisions. We celebrated small victories, like Carlos getting his driver's license or Jasmine completing a certification program in medical billing. We sat with big grief when it surfaced, when Maya had a panic attack triggered by a news story about child abuse, when Carlos got a rejection letter from a job he desperately wanted, when Jasmine's abusive ex found her number and left threatening messages. The second winter was easier than the first in some ways, harder in others. We knew how to keep the house warm now, how to prevent frozen pipes, how to budget for heating costs. But the emotional weight of caring for others, of being responsible for their well-being, of carrying their pain alongside our own, was exhausting in ways I had not anticipated. Rachel and I started seeing a therapist together, recognizing that we needed support too, that we could not pour from empty cups. Those sessions became a lifeline, a space to process our own trauma while also learning how to set boundaries, how to care without burning out, how to recognize when we were taking on too much. Spring of the third year brought expansion. We had proven our model worked, had documented outcomes showing that our residents were achieving stability, pursuing education and employment, building lives that had seemed impossible before. Grant funding increased, allowing us to hire 2 part-time staff members, a counselor and a life skills coordinator, people who could share the load and bring expertise we did not have. We converted the barn into a multi-purpose space, with one section for workshops and group activities, another section for storage and light manufacturing where residents could learn woodworking and other trades. The transformation from empty shell to vibrant community center took months of work. But when we held the opening celebration in May, I stood in the middle of that space and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. Maya graduated from her graphic design program that spring with honors. She had created a portfolio of work that showcased not just technical skill but genuine artistic vision. And she had multiple job offers before graduation. She chose a position at a small marketing firm in the city, an hour commute, but good pay and opportunities for advancement. The day she moved out of Holloway House into her own apartment, we helped her pack her belongings, no longer in garbage bags but in proper suitcases and boxes. Evidence of a life that had substance and permanence. She cried as she hugged us goodbye, but they were different tears than the ones she had shed on her 18th birthday. These were tears of gratitude and possibility, and the bittersweet ache of leaving home. I will be back to visit, she promised. And she kept that promise, returning once a month for Sunday dinners, bringing other former residents who had moved on to independent living, but who still wanted connection to the community that had held them. Those dinners became traditions, the farmhouse table surrounded by young people who were thriving, who were pursuing dreams they had not known they were allowed to have. We told stories and shared food and laughed at inside jokes, and I saw in those moments what Mr. Holloway must have seen when he looked at me as an infant. Not what we were, but what we could become, with support and patience and unwavering belief. The farm itself continued to grow and change. We expanded the gardens to include a small orchard, planting apple and pear trees that would take years to mature but that represented our commitment to the future. We added chickens for eggs, teaching residents animal husbandry and responsibility. We created a farm stand at the end of the driveway where we sold excess produce, with residents staffing it and learning customer service and money management. Every aspect of the farm became an opportunity for learning, for healing, for building confidence through competence. Rachel finished her social work degree and immediately enrolled in a master's program, her passion for the work deepening as she gained experience and knowledge. She started specializing in trauma-informed care, bringing cutting-edge approaches to our program, training our staff, and advocating at the policy level for better support for aging-out foster youth. I watched her transform from the scared young woman who had been living in our attic to a confident professional who spoke at conferences and advised other organizations. Her journey mirrored the journeys of our residents, proof that healing was possible, that people could rewrite their stories if given the chance. I found my own path evolving as well. I completed my business management degree and started taking on a more administrative role at Holloway House, focusing on fundraising and partnership development. I discovered I had a talent for telling our story in ways that moved donors and inspired support. I learned to navigate the nonprofit sector, to build relationships with foundations and government agencies, to think strategically about sustainability and growth. It was different from the hands-on work of running the farm, but it was equally necessary, and I found satisfaction in knowing that my efforts translated into resources that changed lives. The fourth year marked a significant milestone. We had served 23 residents since opening, with 18 of them successfully transitioning to stable, independent living. Our outcomes exceeded national averages for youth aging out of foster care, drawing attention from researchers and policymakers interested in replicating our model. Media coverage brought awareness and additional funding, allowing us to expand further. We purchased the adjacent 40 acres when it came up for sale, doubling our land and creating space for future growth. We dreamed of building additional housing units, of creating a vocational training center, of serving more young people who needed what we offered. But with growth came new challenges. The intimate family atmosphere we had cultivated became harder to maintain as we served more residents and hired more staff. We had to implement more formal policies and procedures, create organizational charts and job descriptions, establish professional boundaries that sometimes felt at odds with the personal connections that had defined our early work. Rachel and I struggled with this transition, mourning the loss of simplicity while recognizing the necessity of structure. We held tight to our core values, insisting that growth would not come at the expense of the relationships and individualized care that made Holloway House effective. There were failures too, painful reminders that good intentions could not save everyone. A resident named Tyler left against our advice, returning to friends who were involved in drug dealing, ending up incarcerated within months. A young woman named Brittany struggled with mental health issues beyond our capacity to address, requiring hospitalization and intensive treatment we could not provide on site. We learned to recognize our limitations, to build better partnerships with mental health providers and crisis services, to accept that we could not be everything to everyone. Each failure haunted me, keeping me awake at night wondering what we could have done differently. But Rachel reminded me that we were part of a larger support system, that our role was important but not omnipotent. By the 5th anniversary of my arrival at the farm, Holloway House had become something beyond what I had imagined that first day when I stood in the empty barn reading Mr. Holloway's letter. We were serving 35 residents across multiple housing units. We employed 12 staff members. We had partnerships with 15 local businesses who provided internships and job opportunities. We ran educational workshops and support groups. We had become a recognized model in our state, consulted by other organizations trying to serve similar populations. The farm that had been abandoned and forgotten was now alive with purpose. Every building and garden and pathway infused with stories of transformation. Rachel and I stood together on that anniversary evening, looking out over the property from the same spot where we had stood 5 years earlier. The oak trees, both old and new, rustled in the warm June breeze. Lights glowed in windows across the property, evidence of lives being lived, futures being built. We had both changed so much, aged in some ways, grown wiser, developed capacities we had not known we possessed. But we were still the same two broken people who had found each other in an attic, still choosing each day to honor the gift we had been given by giving it forward. I thought about Mr. Halloway's letter, his instruction to build something together that neither of us could build alone. We had done that, and more. We had created a community where brokenness was not a disqualification but an entry point, where everyone's story mattered, where transformation was not just possible, but expected. The inheritance he left was not the money or the property, though those had been necessary tools. The real inheritance was the model he provided, the pattern of choosing to care when it would have been easier to walk away, of investing in futures he would never see, of believing that every person had value worth nurturing. I pulled both keys from my pocket, the same keys that had opened the barn door 5 years ago, now carried more out of sentiment than necessity. They had unlocked more than a building or a bank account. They had unlocked possibility itself, the revelation that my life could be about more than survival, that I could choose meaning and purpose and connection. I handed one key to Rachel. "Keep this," I said, as a reminder of where we started and how far we have come. She closed her fingers around it, understanding the symbolism, the shared weight of our history and our future. The next morning brought a new resident, a 16-year-old named Jordan, who had been in foster care since infancy, who carried trauma in every defensive posture and suspicious glance. I met Jordan at the driveway with the same careful openness that Rachel had shown Maya, that Mr. Halloway had shown me. "Welcome home," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "You are safe here. You matter here. You have time and space to figure out who you want to become." Jordan looked at me with the skepticism I had expected, the disbelief that was protective armor. But I saw something else too, buried deep beneath the defensiveness, the same desperate hope I had carried at 18, the fragile wish that maybe this time things could be different. We walked together toward the farmhouse, and I told Jordan about the farm, about the gardens and the chickens and the other residents. I did not tell Jordan about the inheritance yet, about the $3 million, or the elaborate treasure hunt, or the grandfather who had visited me every week. Those stories would come later, when trust had been established, when Jordan was ready to hear that transformation was not just a promise, but a proven path. For now, it was enough to show Jordan a clean room, a seat at the table, a place in this community we had built. That night, after Jordan had settled in and the house had grown quiet, I sat at the kitchen table where I had read Mr. Halloway's letter for the first time. The table was scarred now with years of use, marked by the countless meals and meetings and moments that had happened around it. I ran my hand over the wood, feeling the texture of our collective history, and I understood something I had not fully grasped before. The treasure hunt had never been about the money. It had been about the journey, about learning patience and persistence, and the willingness to trust in things unseen. Mr. Halloway had known that an 18-year-old with sudden wealth would squander it, would not appreciate it, would not understand its potential. But an 18-year-old who had to search, who had to solve puzzles, who had to encounter Rachel and choose generosity. That person might be ready to use wealth wisely. Every resident who came through our doors was on their own treasure hunt, searching for stability and safety and a sense of belonging. We could not give them the answers or make the journey easy, but we could give them keys, literal and metaphorical, tools and support and belief that they were capable of finding what they needed. We could be the stable presence in their lives that Mr. Holloway had been in mine, showing up consistently, refusing to give up on them even when they gave up on themselves. The weight of that responsibility should have felt crushing, but instead it felt right, felt like the natural conclusion of everything that had led me here. I was not the lost infant on the orphanage steps anymore, not the confused 18-year-old with a mysterious key, not even the overwhelmed inheritor wondering what to do with impossible wealth. I was someone who had been given much and who had learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to give in return. I was part of a chain of care that stretched backward to Mr. Holloway and forward to every young person who would walk through our doors in the years to come. That chain was my true inheritance, stronger than any legal document, more valuable than any bank account. The farmhouse settled into its nighttime sounds, the creaks and sighs of old wood, the whisper of wind through window frames. Upstairs, Jordan and the other residents slept, safe for another night, held by walls that had once stood empty, but now sheltered dreams. Rachel was in her room, probably reading for her graduate classes, continuing her education so she could serve better. Outside, the gardens grew silently, season after season, patient and persistent, and I sat in the kitchen feeling the full weight and wonder of what we had built together, what we continued to build every day. We had taken keys that opened a barn and transformed them into keys that opened futures. That was Mr. Holloway's final gift, teaching me that the greatest inheritance is not what you receive, but what you learn to give away.